Right, so like I said at the beginning, the first questions apply to all candidates, all positions. So I'm just gonna go through that first, but before we start, if you guys want to take 60 seconds to do a bit of an opening about yourself, maybe chat a little bit about who you are, or just in general your policies, ideas. So thank you very much for the previous candidates for actually keeping in time. So if we could do a similar exercise. So you can stand up or you can sit down, whichever you'd like. But Ilse, would you be happy going first? Okay.
Hi. Ooh. My name is Ilse Lyon, and I'm running to be your welfare officer for next year. I'm really passionate about helping students, and actually for the past 3 years I've been a part of Nightline. I really want to just help with little things like reducing prices of food on campus and maybe trying to make it easier for you to bring your own food to campus as well. I also really want to go and spend time at Forrester Hill because, as we heard before, they can be really left out of stuff like this, and I really want to just go and sit up there to try and interact with students there. But what I'm really most excited about trying to deal with is promoting mental health. And we all have mental health. It's just like physical health. We have good or bad. And at the moment, it seems to be in crisis. Our counselling service is running at more than its capacity with a 200-person waiting list. So I really want to try and extend the counselling service, but also make sure that students have other resources accessible to them, like workshops, and looking at the possibility of training personal tutors in mental health as well. That's something I really want to make sure happens. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ilse. Yoda, please.
Hello, I'm Iona. I'm running for welfare because I really care about welfare. This is one thing that I have always been passionate about. At university, I was passionate about it at school, where obviously there tends to be a lot less of an opportunity to get involved. I've been involved in welfare-related roles pretty much since I first came here, and especially this year, having not had a welfare SAB, we've really been failing. The welfare committee has been trying very, very hard, but there haven't been a lot of people on the committee. We haven't had the resources available to us we would as a SAB, and I really want to change that. I want to bring welfare back. I want to make sure it works for every single student, and I want to make sure that we look at the issues that we know are a problem, not just in general for students, but for Aberdeen students. So that's things like housing, finances, mental health, everything about that. And I want to make sure that I really listen to your voices, and I work very hard to get students involved in their welfare, so I know exactly what you want me to do to make your life at university as good as it can be.
Thank you, Iona. And Jenny?
Hi, I'm Jenny, and I'm running to be your welfare officer because I believe that we're at a point of change in AUSA. We've done a year without a welfare officer. We've seen counselling cuts that Ailsa was talking about that are absolutely appalling. And I think it's time that we started to take some direction as a community in order to change that. My policies are based around mental health, so first aider training for students in order to have some peer-to-peer support, stress busting sessions that people can attend, and also implementing training for staff on how to deal with mental health disability provisions. I'm also really interested in bringing an SCD clinic in-house to AUSA and also being able to offer self-test kits and appropriate information in the follow-up to that. As well as offering a free periods campaign where we provide free sanitary products for our students. And I'm also really interested in making our campus more accessible, so tackling lad culture and putting gender-neutral toilets into buildings. And that's me, really.
Good, thank you guys very much. Right, so we'll move on straight to the questions that you probably, hopefully, heard already. So the first one is, communications between AUSA and the majority of students can be very limited. How would you make sure you get our message out there and get student buy-in on our activities? And Iona, if you want to start?
Okay, so a lot of things that were mentioned by the previous candidates were things like social media, Facebook, Twitter. They are all things that are very easy to get involved with for the students who may not have heard about AUSA and are important. But what I really want to do, what I have in my manifesto, I talked about it in my campaign video, is I want to run SAB surgeries. So what I would do is I'd fence off 1 or 2 hours every single week, go out around the university, not just on this campus, but go to Forrester Hill, go to the library, go to Hillhead, go to the places that the students actually are, so that I'm firstly a visible presence, but also that students can just come up to me and they don't need to go out of their way to come up to my office to make sure I'm free to ask me just a question, where they can actually come up to me. I'll be sitting there with my special time where I can listen to student issues. We can chat about any council motions that are coming up that they have a particular interest in, and they can tell me what they need. They can ask me questions. So if you're just having a particular problem and need to know where to find the support, you can come up to me and I can direct you to the right place, where in the hub you need to go, where online you need to go, because that is a real issue that we have.
We can finish.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much me. But that's something I'm really, really interested in doing.
Thank you. Ilsa?
Okay. Lots of people have said a lot of really good things, and I don't think there's very much that I can add to that, but I think it would be really good to make the website more accessible, make it more obvious who to talk to, where you can talk to them, who you can drop an email to and about what. And also, as I was saying earlier, I really want to be in Forester Hill more because I think we're not there enough.
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult to answer this question without completely just echoing the sentiments of almost every candidate that's been on this stage already, and I fear there's another 3 rounds to go, so your guys are going to get pretty bored of chat about Facebook. I think that one of the things we can do on top of obviously our social media presence is take campaigns out to students that they want to get involved in. So quite a lot of the time we can be quite insular with the things that we run in AUSA, and students have to come to you to find out what's going on. And I think that, by running, for example, I want to run a campaign on freezing the price of halls. By taking that out to students, by chatting to them about it in the street, by, talking to them about how AUSA can actually improve their lives as students, I think that that's one way to get people to engage, because I think a lot of the time people don't, because they don't understand what it can do for them. And I think that's something we need to change.
Okay. Thank you, guys. And do you want to just keep it? Just keep it. Yeah, just keep it for a bit.
I'm going to drop it or something. Sorry.
I might drop it. Right. So the second question, if Jenny, you want to go first, just for convenience reasons. Our equality networks, formerly known as our liberation forums, are crucial to our missions and values. What would you do to support them and incorporate their input into every project that your role undertakes?
So firstly, I just want to start by saying I think this is maybe a slightly unfair question, because it's in our job remit to do that as welfare officers. It's part of what you're expected to do, is to liaise with the VP Equal Ops and also to support the liberation campaigns in any way possible. But I also think that I have a lot of policies which relate directly to the liberation campaigns, such as mental health and sexual health and accessibility. And I think that that's one way to engage people. But also, as someone who's been a Liberation Forum convener, I know how difficult it is for people who quite often are already overstretched to take on that position. So I would just like to be able to support them as a full-time officer as much as possible, because quite often they can sort of collapse in on themselves with the weight of all the pressure, the things they have to do.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd actually like to echo what Jenny said about being an officer and knowing how really tough it is, because I've been women's officer and I was an equality officer for the LGBT campaign, and it is so much work. So I think it's really good that welfare actually are mandated to work with these officers, because they have so much to do and so many students to represent and support, and they aren't on a SABS, so they have to do that on top of their degrees. So I have a lot of very specific policies, I think, that talk about working with various liberation groups. I want to work with the BME liberation officers to make sure that we keep BME students represented and involved in AUSA. That's a massive issue we've had in the past. I want to run workshops as part of bringing back Shag Week about being a disabled and a sexual person, because that's something that gets overlooked so often. I also want to run workshops about being LGBT and about sort of being a woman who has sex with women, or identifying as ace or pan. A lot of people don't even know what those things are, and we really need to get that out there. But also, I want to be able to go to the liberation officers and ask them, every time I run a campaign or every time they run a campaign, make sure it's going to be inclusive, and so that I can actually use their experience to help me and to make sure that every campaign I run is going to affect all students equally and represent them properly.
Thank you, Iona. And Ilsa, please.
I think the key answer to this question is actually in the question, and that's how would you work with all the liberation officers on everything you're doing? you would work with all the liberation officers and everything you're doing. That's about it. So the way I do that is asking people on the liberation forums what it is that they want, but also talking to them about my campaigns and saying, listen guys, is this going to work? Is this going to work with you?
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to the role-specific questions. And just a reminder, please put your cards up if you have questions from the audience, or go on Twitter so our candidates here can answer some more questions from the audience. Right, so the first one that I received from a student yesterday is on medical certificates. So she says, obtaining a medical certificate for classes is very expensive. Do you plan to support students financially to acquire them? Iona, I'm just trying to mix the roundup a bit. Iona, would you be happy going first?
Okay, so I have a specific policy on my manifesto about this because this is something I've had to deal with over my time at university, getting self-certified things, and they are really expensive, and the cost of getting them is going up all the time. So I've said in one of my policies under finance that I specifically want to make sure that the university either pays for medical certificates or reimburses students who've had to get them, because they're required by the university for a lot of things. It's them that needs it, it's them that should be paying for it, because otherwise it further penalises students, especially students who've had issues with their mental health, with their physical health, who are disabled students, or students who don't have as much income to be spending on medical certificates. It penalises those students specifically, and that's not something that's okay at a university level. So what I would do is make sure that there is a fund, or we increase the hardship fund to absorb that, to make sure the university pays for those medical certificates, because it's not okay that students are being penalised for being ill.
Thank you. Elsa, do you want to go? And then Jenny?
Yeah, I just want to echo really what Iona said. Being ill is not great, puts you behind on your work. Having to pay for a medical certificate on top of that just makes things worse. So I really want to try and work with the university to sort this out. Because as Iona was saying, they're the ones who need it, they're the ones who need that certification, so they're the ones who should be paying for it.
Okay, Jenny?
Obviously, I think the medical certificates should be paid for by the university. I don't want to repeat what else that Iona have said. But also, I think a lot of what this comes down to is the fact that quite often when you have a medical certificate for a long-term ongoing illness, your department don't understand that. When I was a school convener in social science, and a lot of the problems that came to me were people who were being repeatedly asked by different tutors to get medical certificates for the same issues which they have been throughout their career, which not only is a financial strain, but it's actually very, very stressful for people to have to, go and see the doctor and so on and so forth. So I think that's also something we need to tackle at a department level as well, not just making them free for students.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask you, Jenny, to go first this time for the last question that I have here on my set. And it's something that you've already mentioned, all of you. So the question is, how would you go about trying to release the current strain on our counselling services? Are there any checks and balances you can put in place?
So obviously counselling services is funded by the university and not directly the responsibility of AUSA, but that's as part of being the welfare officer, part of your job is lobbying for services like counselling, which I think is incredibly important. But also I think, and this is in no way a replacement for counselling, I think that peer-to-peer mental health support services are incredibly important. I'm not saying that they do the full job, but I'm saying that they give people something in the meantime. And also just making other mental health services that are available in the city more widely accessible to people. A lot of people who go to the Aberdeen University Counselling don't know about potentially the services they can get from their GP or from other organisations in the city. So yeah.
Okay, Iona?
Okay, so first of all, I think doing anything we can to relieve the strain on our counselling services is good. I want to have de-stress workshops that people can drop into that either change every week, or there's a series of them going on every week. We used to have drop-in yoga in the Butchart Centre every week. There's no reason we can't bring that back. Meditation, mindfulness are all things that can be done with limited resources and which will help all students. The counselling services specifically is something we've been looking at on welfare this year. I know people who've in the past had to wait a year just to get the primary appointment where they're evaluated to see if counselling could help them. This is not okay on any level. We know in Aberdeen that we have a severe mental health problem. And the counselling service, there's 5 counsellors right now trying to deal with, what do we have, 14,000 students at the moment? It's a ridiculous number. And the issue that counselling told us is currently their funding is all right, but they are potentially losing 2 staff this year. The university, through their cuts, has put a ban on hiring. 2 counsellors, 2 out of the 5, are coming up for the end of their contracts at the end of this year. And unless they can find wiggle room in that hiring ban, those counsellors won't be able to be rehired back. We need more counsellors. We don't need fewer counsellors. So I would be lobbying the university very strongly to remove any freeze on hiring and counselling and to hire more counsellors, because that is a major issue, and that is why the counselling service is so overstretched.
Thank you. And Ilsa?
I mentioned this earlier, and I'll come back to some different things as well, but I've actually been speaking to the head of the counselling service, and one of the things that she said to me was we really need student feedback to go back to the university so that they know exactly how much we're appreciated, and that's what I want to do, to be able to lobby the university effectively, is to let them know how valuable this service is to students, but also to take some of the strain off the counselling service. I think it's really important to have mental health training for personal tutors. They can often be a first port of call for students, and if they don't know how to deal with a mental health problem, or if they don't know who to pass it on to, that can all get shoved into counselling when actually those problems could be better dealt with by an outside organisation or a GP.
Okay, thank you guys very much. And now we're on to questions from the audience, which I'm very happy to be receiving. Okay, thank you very much. Right, let's see if I can read the handwriting. Really bad with this. But let's start with the ones from Twitter. So the first one for you guys is, how can you work with other SABs, for example, with the sports officer, communities officer, and the rest, to improve student welfare? So how would you collaborate? Iona, would you go first, and then Jenny, and then Ilsa?
No.
Or whichever of you guys want.
I'm happy to go first if you want to.
Yeah?
Okay, so again, I want to run drop-in workshops and de-stress workshops. For that, I'm specifically looking at working with the Sports SAB, working with the Society SAB, because there's a huge just number of students involved in societies and sports, and it's really a huge resource. These students want to get involved in other students' life. They want to get more people into their sports and societies, and having very, very casual sports sessions, casual sessions with the Knitting Society, for example, which don't involve financial pressures or any commitment to sort of staying in a society for an entire year, is a great way to help it. I'd also look at, again, working with our liberation officers as well as the sports and societies to make sure that every sports society is fully accessible for all students, and there's no obvious issues being flagged up by the liberation officers that are preventing students from getting involved in sports and from getting involved in societies. I think it's really important that all SAB officers work together and work with the liberation officers for that kind of issue.
Okay, Jenny?
I don't know how many of you have seen my excellent video, but one of the reasons that I'm doing this is because I think that welfare should be at the heart of everything we do. I was really sort of elated to see that candidates in almost every position are running on mental health, because it is such an issue on our campus. So I think in that way, like, obviously there is definitely a place to work with every single officer, from sports to president to education to communities. Specifically, I would love to work with a sports sabbatical officer on getting people involved in sport in a way that's not competitive, but, like, as Iona says, with these deep stress busting sessions. But I would also like to work with a communities officer and how we sort of bring welfare into the things that we do as a campus. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of things have already been said, like working with the sports officers especially. Sport can be so good, not just for your physical health, but for mental health as well. And working on how to promote being more healthy and exercising more is something I'd really like to do. I'd also love to work with the communities officer on things like housing prices, as I know that comes into student welfare as well, and lowering food prices and stuff like that.
Thank you. Okay, so one more question coming from Twitter is, and I'm going to ask Jenny to start. Did you start before? No? Would you be happy starting? Yeah. So how would you ensure your work is not just about lobbying and campaigns, but actually implementing change?
So I think that by running campaigns, you necessarily implement change. That's what campaigns seek to do. So I'm sorry, whoever asked that question, I don't particularly understand that aspect of it. I understand quite a lot what we hear from candidates is, I'll lobby for this and I'll lobby for that. But that's actually an inherent part of your job role. And I think that more than that, what you should do is set out concrete goals. So for example, I want to make self-test kits available for SCDs from AUSA, and I will do that within the first month of being elected. That is a tangible goal, which will cause change, I believe. Sorry, what was the question?
So the question is, how will you ensure your work is not just about lobbying and campaigns, but actually implementing change?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Iona?
Okay, so like Jenny said, I think a lot of people hear lobby and they hear campaign and they think of it as a vague, wishy-washy term that doesn't actually set out to do anything concrete. If you have very specific aims when you start your campaigns and when you start lobbying, I have specific aim, like I've said, I want to lobby the counselling service, but I have a specific aim in that in removing the hiring freeze on the counselling service and getting more counsellors. That means that there's a thing that you can look at and say, this is what I'm doing. But I also have a lot of policies that are about running things. So things like running workshops, de-stress workshops, and also workshops on just skills on things we aren't taught in school. That's something that as soon as the training's over, you can start doing right away. You can get the students together, you can start booking rooms, you can plan out your weeks. The SAB surgeries, that's something I can basically start doing. I can just go out on campus and start doing that. I have a lot of policies about that are about writing down information, starting workshops, things that can happen without really needing prolonged lobbying campaigns. So
Thank you.
Yeah, all the points on my manifesto are actually completely achievable. I'm 100% sure of that because I've checked before writing it. I'm already in contact with lots of members of staff, and I've made sure some of these things can happen almost immediately. I also think it's really important to try and work with the university, not just lobbying them and banging on their front door shouting, but actually saying, listen, we need to work together to try and fix some of these problems. And I think that's the most effective way of moving forward.
Okay, and the last question, which comes from the floor. How do you plan to ensure student loans are available to students in need? It doesn't specify which type of student loan, so do your best. But do you want to have some?
I'll give it a bash. If you want.
I don't mind, I've got stuff, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so student loans typically means the loans that you get from the government and from SAS. In terms of that, that's something that hopefully you've got before you get to university, although I know a lot of people have had issues with that, just in terms of getting through to SAS, sometimes getting on the right tier. We have help, we have support services that will support you through that at university. They're hidden away in the hub, they're very difficult to get to. You have to go through the main sort of student office, help office. So I want to make sure that all our support services are linked up, are easy to access. There's also things like the hardship fund, so that's not specifically a loan, but that's something that helps ease the financial burden of students. So I want to make sure the hardship fund is much better advertised and students know exactly how to access it, what to take with them, because often the hardship fund has money left over at the end of the year that has been ring-fenced off to give to students who are currently having issues with their finances. That's something I definitely want to push forward.
Thank you. Jenny and then Elsa, please.
Yeah, just to honestly completely echo what Iona said there. When it comes to hardship funding, I think that the way we do it as a university is pretty archaic. You have to find some back office and speak to a woman and get a form, and it's all very cloak and dagger. I think what we need to do to make it more accessible is not only target every student when they first get here about information about what financial services are available to them, but also to move those services online, so that you can apply for a hardship fund through most of the stuff that you have to present to get a hardship fund is things that you will have to take off of your online banking, and such. So it'd be much easier for people just to be able to apply for it online instead of having to go and find this office and find this form and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think in terms of loans especially, there are people who can help, for example, with applying to SAS, and that's something that needs to be made more accessible. And I would echo as well the thoughts about the hardship fund, that is not accessible. But I think there's also a lot of stigma around that, where people might think, I don't want to appear weak or go in and ask for money from the university. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed as well. But in general, making those resources much more available and much more obvious is something I really want to do.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you guys very much. What I'm going to ask you to do next, if you're happy to, is to take 30 seconds for some closing remarks. Basically, just answer the question that we've had before, which is, why do you want this job? Let's go with Elsa first, then Iona, and then Jenny, you want to close up?
Like I said at the start, this is something I'm really passionate about. I know how difficult it can be being a student and moving away from home, especially coming from a different country, or if you're far away from your family. I just really want to be able to help students, as I know firsthand how difficult it can be, and that's really why I want this job. So vote for me if you want.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I obviously feel very strongly about welfare. I always have done. I stood up at the EGM a few weeks ago and basically shouted at an entire room of students about how welfare is really, really important and we have to protect it. There's particularly problems right now with the cuts are hitting students. They're hitting the students who need services most. That's a huge problem. And not having a welfare SAB for a year means that welfare has been kind of floundering. That's a huge issue. We need to immediately kickstart welfare and make sure it's back. All the campaigns, everything that we run are 100%, and that we work for every single student and we don't forget anyone. That's something I'm really passionate about. I really care about this. Check out my manifesto online and vote Iona #1 for welfare, please.
Thank you, Iona. Jenny.
I don't want to keep saying it, but I find myself doing it. I think that welfare should be at the heart of everything we do as a union. We've seen in the last year that when we let that slide, we let down the most vulnerable students, and we exclude more and more people from AUSA, and really at this point we can't continue doing that, or we just cease to exist. I've got some really tangible policies that I care about and that I can implement very straightforwardly, and I would love it if you gave me the opportunity to be your welfare officer. So vote #KillingIt #1 for welfare. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys very much. Woo-hoo. Okay.